They mocked the shy chess player, not knowing he's a mixed martial arts prodigy. 15-year-old Elijah Chen slouched in his seat at the back of the classroom, trying his best to become invisible. With his slightly rounded shoulders, oversized glasses and the permanent crease of concentration between his eyebrows, he was the perfect picture of a high school nobody. That 5'7" and somewhat skinny despite the slight softness around his middle, Elijah wasn't physically imposing by any measure. His tendency to spend lunch periods hunched over a chessboard or buried in calculus problems didn't help his social standing at Westridge High. What no one at Westridge knew, what no one could possibly guess from looking at him, was that Elijah had trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai since he was 6 years old. Back in Chicago, before his family's move 3 months ago, he had been a junior state champion with multiple tournament wins. His father, a former competitive fighter himself, had instilled in Elijah a philosophy that martial arts were for discipline and self-defense, never for showing off or intimidation. Real strength is quiet, his father always said. It doesn't need to announce itself. At Westridge, Elijah had taken that lesson perhaps too much to heart. New school, new start. He'd decided to focus on his academics and chess club rather than fighting. His parents had supported his decision to take a break from competitions after the move. Unfortunately, Elijah's desire to blend in made him stand out in all the wrong ways to Westridge's resident tormentors, Blake Thompson and his two shadows, Derek Fuller and Max Reeves. Blake, a junior and varsity football linebacker with broad shoulders and a perpetual smirk, had made an art form of identifying and exploiting weakness. At 6'2" with confident swagger and expensive clothes, he commanded both fear and admiration from the student body. Derek and Max, nearly as large but with half the charisma, followed Blake's lead in everything, including his choice of targets. Around them orbited the usual high school ecosystem: cheerleaders who giggled nervously at Blake's jokes, teachers who looked the other way to avoid confrontation with the star athlete's influential parents, and countless students who kept their heads down in silent relief that they weren't the ones in the crosshairs. Setting: Westridge High School sat on the affluent side of Lakewood, a suburb known for its competitive academic programs and championship-winning sports teams. The modern building, with its gleaming glass entrance and manicured grounds, projected an image of excellence and opportunity. The school board loved to boast about college acceptance rates and SAT scores. They were less eager to address what happened in the spaces between classes. For Elijah, 3 areas had become particularly treacherous terrain: the main hallway, intersection after third period, when students flooded the corridors in a chaotic rush, provided Blake with both audience and cover. The cafeteria, with its rigid social hierarchy reflected in table assignments as immutable as law, was a daily gauntlet of potential humiliation. And worst of all was the locker room before gym class, where teacher supervision was minimal and escape routes were limited. Initial conflict. Setup. Elijah's strategy for survival was simple: arrive early, leave late, and make himself as uninteresting as possible in between. For the first few weeks after his mid-semester transfer, this approach had worked. He was just another face in the crowd, notable only for occasionally answering difficult questions in AP Physics. That changed the day Blake caught sight of Elijah's chessboard as he was setting up for a lunchtime match with Mr. Garrett, the aging math teacher who had taken a liking to the quiet new student. "Well, look what we've got here," Blake's voice carried across the cafeteria, causing conversations to falter as heads turned. Chessboy's got himself a hot date with Mr. G. Elijah's fingers froze on the knight he was positioning. He kept his eyes down, hoping Blake would lose interest if he didn't react. "I'm talking to you, chessboy." Blake was beside the table now, looming over Elijah with Derek and Max flanking him. "Don't you know it's rude to ignore people?" "Just setting up for a game," Elijah said quietly, still not looking up. Blake reached down and plucked the white queen from the board. "This, the most action you get? Playing with your little toys at lunch?" He tossed the piece in the air and caught it. "Don't engage. It only makes it worse," Elijah reminded himself, his father's words echoing in his mind. Mr. Garrett was running late, and no other teachers were within earshot. The surrounding students watched with the uncomfortable fascination of witnesses to a car accident, simultaneously compelled and repelled. "Can I have that back, please?" Elijah asked, his voice steady, despite the heat rising in his cheeks. Blake snorted. "Sure thing, chess boy." He set the queen down with exaggerated care. Then, accidentally knocked several pieces to the floor with his elbow. Oops, butterfingers. Laughter rippled through the onlookers as Elijah silently knelt to retrieve the scattered pieces. As he reached for the white bishop, Blake's foot came down on it, not quite hard enough to break it, but with clear intent. "Sorry about that," Blake said, not sounding sorry at all. "Guess you'll have to be quicker next time." When he finally moved his foot, Elijah collected the piece and returned to his seat, face burning but expression neutral. He carefully rearranged the board, hyper-aware of every eye on him. "This is nothing," he told himself, "just words and games, not worth fighting over." But that first incident opened the floodgates. Over the next few weeks, Chess Boy became Elijah's unwanted identity. Blake and his friends developed a routine of accidentally knocking into Elijah in the hallways, sending his books scattering across the floor. They mimicked his focused expression when he solved problems in class. They created an elaborate theory, broadcast widely, that Elijah's glasses weren't prescription but worn as a virgin disguise. Each day, Elijah absorbed the taunts and shoves with outward calm, picking himself up, retrieving his belongings, and continuing on his way without visible reaction. Inside, though, a familiar heat was building, the fire his BJJ coach had taught him to channel on the mat. Not here, he reminded himself each time, not for this. Gym class became particularly hellish. After finding Elijah's gym bag, mysteriously, soaked with water twice in 1 week, he took to changing in a bathroom stall, which only amplified the whispers and snickers about what he might be hiding. During team selections, he was invariably chosen last, accompanied by Blake's theatrical sighs of, "Do we have to take Chess Boy? Don't let them see it bothers you," his mother advised when she noticed his increasingly withdrawn demeanor at her home. "They'll get bored eventually." But they didn't get bored. If anything, Elijah's non-reaction seemed to intensify their determination to crack his composure. Middle escalation. 6 weeks into the semester, Elijah found a flyer for the regional chess tournament pinned to the activities board. For the first time since moving, he felt a flicker of genuine excitement. Chess was the one area where he'd allowed himself to excel publicly at Westridge, and Mr. Garrett had been encouraging him to compete. The next day, Elijah arrived early to submit his registration form to the front office. As he turned to leave, the secretary called after him, "Oh, Elijah? I almost forgot. Your gym locker combination needed to be reset. Here's the new code." A coldness settled in Elijah's stomach as he took the slip of paper. He hadn't reported any issues with his gym locker. His suspicions were confirmed that afternoon when he entered the locker room for PE and found a small crowd gathered near his assigned space, muffled laughter rippling through the group. Blake stood at the center, holding something in his hands. As the group parted to let Elijah through, he saw what it was, his chess tournament application form, now decorated with crude anatomical drawings and suggestions about what Elijah could do with his chess pieces. "Looking for this, Chess Boy?" Blake grinned, holding the paper just out of reach. "We thought we'd help you fill out all those boring empty spaces." "Give it back," Elijah said, his voice low but steadier than he felt. "Sure thing." Blake made as if to hand it over, then pulled it back at the last second. "But first we need to document this historic moment, Chess Boy's big tournament." He held up his phone and directed Elijah to stand against the lockers. "Smile for your chess team profile pic." When Elijah didn't move, Derek and Max flanked him, each gripping one of his arms. "Come on, don't be shy," Blake cajoled as they pushed Elijah against the lockers. "You just stand right here and we'll make you look good." Elijah felt the cold metal against his back as Blake approached with the phone. "Maybe hold this up," Blake suggested, shoving the defaced form toward Elijah's face. When Elijah kept his hands at his sides, Blake's smile tightened. "I said hold it." "No," Elijah said simply. Blake's eyebrows rose. "No? Did Chess Boy just tell me no?" He looked around at his audience, who shifted uncomfortably. Something in Elijah's tone had changed the atmosphere. "You heard me," Elijah said, meeting Blake's eyes directly for the first time. The momentary surprise in Blake's expression quickly hardened to anger. He crumpled the chess tournament form and threw it at Elijah's face. "You know what? I'm sick of your attitude, Chen. Acting all superior when you're nothing." Blake stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over Elijah. "You think you're too good to play along? Time someone taught you how things work around here." Elijah felt a calm settling over him, the same focused clarity he experienced before tournaments. His breathing steadied as Blake grabbed the front of his shirt. "I don't want trouble," Elijah said, his voice quiet but firm. Blake laughed. "Should have thought of that earlier, chess boy." As Blake drew back his fist, Elijah saw Coach Morris enter the locker room periphery, then pause, assessing the situation. Their eyes met briefly, and Elijah caught the slight hesitation before the coach turned away, pretending not to see what was happening. Something snapped inside Elijah. No one is coming to help. No one ever does. The first punch never landed. With a fluid movement that surprised even himself after months without practice, Elijah slipped to the side, causing Blake to stumble slightly off balance. "What the—" Blake's confusion was short-lived as he regained his footing and lunged again. This time, Elijah didn't just evade. He redirected Blake's momentum, using a basic technique that had been drilled into muscle memory through thousands of repetitions. Blake found himself stumbling forward into the lockers with a resounding crash. The locker room fell silent. "Lucky move," Blake snarled, his face flushing with embarrassment as he pushed himself off the lockers. He rushed Elijah with more caution this time. Elijah remained centered, his stance subtly shifting. When Blake swung again, Elijah blocked the punch with his forearm, deflecting the force rather than absorbing it. Without conscious thought, years of training took over. A quick sweep of Blake's leading leg sent the larger boy sprawling to the floor. The gathered students gasped collectively. Derek and Max exchanged uncertain glances before moving toward Elijah from opposite sides. "Don't," Elijah warned, his voice still quiet but carrying in the stunned silence. "I don't want to fight you." They hesitated, looking to Blake for direction, but Blake was already scrambling to his feet, rage replacing his initial shock. "You're dead, Chen," he growled, charging forward with abandon. What followed happened so quickly that many students later disagreed about the exact sequence. Elijah sidestepped Blake's rush, used the larger boy's momentum to control his direction, and applied a simple joint lock that brought Blake to his knees with a yelp of surprise and pain. "Stop," Elijah said, maintaining the hold without applying enough pressure to cause real injury. "It's over." For a moment, no one moved. The only sounds were Blake's heavy breathing and the distant echo of students in the gymnasium. Then Coach Morris reappeared, his expression shifting rapidly from disbelief to stern authority. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Though the scene spoke for itself, the school's star linebacker kneeling on the floor, effectively immobilized by the unassuming new kid. Elijah immediately released his hold and stepped back, hands raised to show he was done. "He attacked me," Blake said immediately, getting to his feet and putting as much distance as possible between himself and Elijah. "Came at me out of nowhere." Several students shifted uncomfortably at the blatant lie, but no one spoke up. "Is that true?" Coach Morris asked, looking directly at Elijah. Elijah met his gaze steadily. "No, sir, but I did defend myself." "Both of you, principal's office, now." The coach turned to the rest of the students. "The rest of you, get changed. You've got 2 minutes before you're all running laps." As Elijah collected his belongings, he noticed something had changed in the way the other students looked at him. The pity and discomfort had been replaced by something else, something between respect and wariness. On the way to the principal's office, Blake maintained as much distance as the hallway allowed, shooting venomous glances at Elijah when he thought Coach Morris wasn't looking. "I should feel worried," Elijah thought, "but all I feel is relief." Climactic confrontation. Word of what happened in the locker room spread through Westridge High with the viral efficiency that only high school gossip can achieve. By the next morning, the story had evolved through multiple tellings, each more elaborate than the last. In some versions, Elijah had performed flying kicks. In others, he had knocked Blake unconscious. The truth was less dramatic but more impactful. After reviewing hallway camera footage that showed Blake and his friends following Elijah into the locker room carrying his chess tournament form, along with timestamps that proved they had accessed his locker without permission, the principal had suspended Blake for 3 days. Elijah received after-school detention for physical altercation, despite the administration's private acknowledgement that he had acted in self-defense. Blake's return to school the following Monday brought palpable tension to the hallways. The morning passed without incident, leading some to speculate that perhaps Blake had learned his lesson. Those who knew him better recognized the calculated restraint of someone planning rather than retreating. The Des confrontation, when it came, was precisely choreographed for maximum audience and minimum adult interference. The 15-minute break between fourth and fifth periods found Elijah at his locker, exchanging books for his afternoon classes. Chen. Blake's voice cut through the hallway chatter, causing nearby conversations to falter. He stood at the intersection of two main corridors, Derek and Max flanking him as usual, but this time they'd brought reinforcements, two seniors from the football team. Elijah closed his locker slowly, taking a measured breath before turning to face them. This was always coming, he thought. I think we have some unfinished business, Blake continued, his voice carrying down the corridor. Students began gathering at a safe distance, forming a loose circle around the developing scene. I don't want trouble, Blake, Elijah said, loud enough for others to hear. What happened in the locker room is done. Blake's smile was cold. See, that's where you're wrong. It's not done until I say it's done. He stepped forward, his friends spreading out to block potential escape routes. You caught me off guard last time. Sucker moves, that won't happen again. The gathering crowd had grown, students jostling for position to see. Elijah noticed several people had their phones out, recording. A few looked uncomfortable, but no one intervened. No teachers were in sight, exactly as Blake had planned. 5 against 1, Elijah observed, keeping his voice steady. Is that what you need to feel confident now? A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Blake's face darkened. I don't need anyone, he snapped. They're just here to make sure no one interferes. He stepped closer, entering Elijah's personal space. Just you and me, chess boy. Elijah didn't back away. I won't fight you, Blake. No? Blake shoved Elijah hard, sending him back against the lockers with a crash. Guess you'll just take a beating then. The hallway had gone completely silent. The collective breath of dozens of students held in anticipation. Elijah straightened, slowly adjusting his glasses, which had been knocked askew. Last chance, Elijah said quietly. Walk away. Blake laughed and swung a haymaker aimed at Elijah's face. What happened next would be replayed on dozens of student phones throughout the school for weeks afterward. Elijah moved with the fluid precision of someone who had practiced these movements thousands of times. He slipped the punch, moved inside Blake's guard, and executed a perfect hip throw that sent Blake crashing to the floor with enough force to knock the wind from his lungs. Blake scrambled to his feet, face red with rage and embarrassment. This time he rushed forward with both arms extended, attempting to grapple. Elijah sidestepped, used Blake's momentum to guide him into a controlled fall, and smoothly transitioned to a simple restraining position. Stay down, Elijah advised, his breathing barely elevated. It's over. Get him, Blake shouted to his friends. Derek and Max hesitated, their earlier confidence evaporating at the evidence of Elijah's skill. One of the seniors took a tentative step forward, but stopped when a voice cut through the crowd. That's enough. Ms. Rivera, the vice principal, pushed through the ring of students, her expression thunderous. Behind her came Mr. Garrett and Coach Morris. Break it up now, Ms. Rivera commanded. Everyone not directly involved get to class immediately. Elijah released his hold and stood, straightening his clothes with composure that belied the adrenaline, coursing through him. Blake got to his feet more slowly, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. You 5, and you, Ms. Rivera pointed to Blake's group, and then Elijah. My office, now. As Elijah followed her through the dispersing crowd, he caught fragments of whispered conversations. Did you see how fast he moved? Blake never even touched him. I heard he's some kind of martial arts champion. Coach Morris fell into step beside Elijah. That was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he said quietly. Not a question, but a statement. Elijah nodded. Black belt? The coach asked. Brown, Elijah corrected. Was competing at the state level before we moved. Coach Morris shook his head with something like reluctant admiration. You could have hurt him badly. That's not what martial arts is for, Elijah replied. Something shifted in the coach's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or guilt. Resolution. The consequences came swiftly, despite multiple videos showing Elijah had acted in self-defense against a premeditated group confrontation. The school's zero-tolerance policy meant everyone involved received some form of punishment. Blake and his friends were suspended for 2 weeks, with Blake receiving an additional requirement of mandatory counseling sessions. Elijah was assigned a week of after-school community service cleaning the school grounds, a relatively light sentence that many took as the administration's tacit acknowledgement of where the true blame lay. When Elijah returned to school the next day, everything had changed. People who had never spoken to him before nodded in greeting as he passed. His usual isolated seat in the cafeteria gradually filled with curious classmates, asking tentative, Questions about chess, martial arts, his old school in Chicago. Is it true you won a national championship? A freshman asked as Elijah set up his chessboard for a lunch game. State runner-up, Elijah corrected, and that was last year. Still pretty awesome, the younger student said. Think you could show me some moves sometime? The chess ones, I mean. Though the other stuff was cool too. Elijah smiled slightly. Sure. Do you know how the pieces move? By the time Blake and his friends returned from suspension, the social landscape of Westridge had shifted. Blake's untouchable status had eroded, replaced by a new wariness from his former admirers. People still gave him space in the hallways, but the deference had a different quality now, caution rather than respect. The first time Blake and Elijah passed each other in the hallway after his return, an expectant hush fell over the surrounding students. Blake kept his eyes straight ahead, jaw tight, giving Elijah a wide berth without acknowledging his presence. 2 weeks later, Coach Morris approached Elijah after gym class. "Chen, got a minute?" Elijah nodded, expecting perhaps a delayed lecture about appropriate conflict resolution. "The wrestling team could use someone with your skills," the coach said instead. "And the BJJ club at Central Community College meets twice a week. I help coach there sometimes. They welcome high school students with advanced training." "I'll think about it," Elijah said, surprised by the offer. "Do that," Coach Morris nodded. "And Chen, what you did controlling the situation without causing serious harm, that showed real discipline. Not everyone would have made that choice." The coach's words stayed with Elijah throughout the day. Through AP Physics, where he answered questions without hesitation now. Through lunch, where he taught chess openings to a growing group of interested students. Through the afternoon hallways, where Blake still walked with his head high, but his eyes sliding away from any direct confrontation. After school, Elijah found Blake alone at his locker, the hallway temporarily empty as clubs and sports practices began. I should just walk by, Elijah thought, but something made him stop. Blake. The larger boy tensed but didn't turn around. "What do you want, Chen? Come to gloat?" "No," Elijah said simply. "Just wanted to say it's over as far as I'm concerned. We don't need to be friends, but we don't need to be enemies either." Blake finally turned, suspicion evident in his expression. "Why would you say that? After everything?" Elijah shrugged. "Because holding grudges takes energy I'd rather use for other things." For a long moment, Blake said nothing, his face working through several emotions, before settling into grudging neutrality. "Whatever," he muttered, slamming his locker shut. But as he walked away, he added almost too quietly to hear, "Sorry about your chess form thing. It wasn't much, but it was something." That evening, Elijah registered for both the regional chess tournament and the community college BJJ sessions. That dinner, he told his parents about his day. The first time in months he'd volunteered information without being asked. "Sounds like you're finally finding your place," his father observed. Elijah considered this. "I think I'm just being all of myself now, not just parts." His father nodded approvingly. "That's what real strength is. Not hiding what makes you different, but not using it to dominate others either." Later, as Elijah practiced chess problems before bed, his phone buzzed with a social media notification. His first friend request from a Westridge classmate, then another and another. He accepted them with a small smile. Real strength is quiet, he thought, recalling his father's words. But sometimes it needs to make itself known. The next morning, Elijah Chen walked through the doors of Westridge High with his shoulders back and his head high, not as chess boy or that fighter kid, but simply as himself, a teenager with multiple dimensions, comfortable in his own complexity, and finally visible for who he really was.